The air on the ship was cold and still as Captain Antic-Ton walked down the metallic corridors of his vessel. His hooves clinked against the steel floor, echoing softly. Today was just like any other day aboard the Star Hunter, a ship infamous for transporting exotic creatures from distant planets. But something about the latest catch didn't sit well with him. Standing in the medical bay, Jinta, the ship's veterinarian, was busy inspecting the new specimen. She was a Shelo, a graceful, two-armed, four-legged species known for their quiet nature and sense of justice. Her brown fur, streaked with white, bristled slightly as the captain entered. Her kind never liked this line of work. Most Shelos avoided it, but Jinta had no choice. She was trapped here, just like the creatures she cared for. Did it resist? Captain Antic-Ton asked, his deep voice cutting through the silence. Jinta looked up, her bright eyes filled with unease. No, Captain. It's a male, and as you already guessed, it's sentient. He didn't resist. The captain let out a chuckle, but it didn't hide his suspicion. A sentient creature from a distant planet, caught without a fight. That's surprising. Jinta hesitated. She wasn't one to speak much, especially to the captain. But there was something about this one, this human, that bothered her. Captain, there's more to him than meets the eye. The captain rolled his large, round eyes. He had seen countless creatures over the years, some weak, some dangerous, and some downright bizarre. What could possibly be special about this one? Let me guess, he said sarcastically. He's another harmless creature scared out of its wits, isn't he? Jinta didn't smile at his joke. Instead, she straightened, her fur smoothing down slightly. Captain, you should know, he's heavily muscled. Much more than any creature I've seen, even those from high-gravity worlds. And she paused, her voice dropping lower. He's a carnivore. That word made the captain stop. Carnivorous species were rare in the galaxy. Most intelligent beings preferred plants or fungi, anything that didn't involve hunting. The idea of a sentient carnivore was unsettling. A predator, then. Yes, Jinta said firmly. And not just any predator. He's calm. Too calm for someone in his situation. He knows something, Captain. The captain frowned, his hooves shifting uneasily on the floor. He didn't like mysteries, especially ones that involved his ship. A tiny creature like that. He wouldn't stand a chance against us. He should be grateful we didn't harm him. But Jinta wasn't convinced. Her instincts told her this human was dangerous in ways the captain couldn't understand. You should be careful with him, Captain. I've seen creatures fight to the death just to escape. He didn't fight, but that doesn't mean he's weak. The captain dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Be grateful he didn't give you more work. Since you don't need to patch him up, take the rest of the day off. I'll deal with him later. Jinta didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked away. But her words lingered in the captain's mind. What kind of sentient carnivore allowed itself to be captured so easily? The human sat quietly in his cell, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The cell was made of reinforced metal, designed to hold even the strongest creatures from the deadliest planets. But he didn't seem bothered. His hands rested calmly on his knees, his breathing steady. The guards watching him from outside the cell couldn't help but feel uneasy. One whispered to another, "Why is he just sitting there? Shouldn't he be scared or angry?" The other shrugged, but his voice carried a hint of fear. "I don't know, but I don't like it. He hasn't said a word since he got here." Deep in thought, the captain stood in the observation room, watching the human through a screen. He could see the creature's steady movements, the way his eyes followed every detail in the cell. He wasn't panicked or desperate. He was waiting. The captain's thoughts wandered to the lower decks of his ship, where another predator lurked, a night beast from a Class 11 death world. That creature was pure instinct, all muscle and rage. It had been difficult to capture and even harder to contain. But this human, he was different. Jinta's words echoed in his mind. Be careful with him. For the first time in years, Captain Antic Ton felt a flicker of doubt. The silence of the ship's holding bay was thick and oppressive. The human sat in his reinforced cell, his calm demeanor unnerving to the guards who stood watch. Every shift of his body, every flicker of his eyes, seemed deliberate. It was as if he were mapping the space, planning something no one else could see. Captain Antic Ton couldn't look away from the surveillance feed. He watched the human's steady, controlled movements with growing unease. Something about him was off, not in his appearance, but in his stillness. Most captured beings displayed fear, anger, or confusion. This one radiated a quiet confidence. Any signs of distress? The captain asked the lead guard through the comm system. "No, sir," the guard replied, his voice uneasy. "It's eerie. He hasn't made a sound, hasn't tried anything. He just sits there, watching." The captain frowned, his hooves tapping against the floor. He didn't like mysteries, and this human was becoming one. "Keep your distance. Don't interact with him unless absolutely necessary." Deep inside the cell, the human sat with his hands resting on his knees, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of his confinement. He had already assessed the strength of the walls, the placement of the cameras, and the timing of the guards' rotations. He wasn't worried. Above him, in the observation deck, 2 guards whispered nervously. "He's too quiet," one said, shifting uneasily. "Like he's waiting for something." "Yeah," the other muttered. "But what can he do? That cell is reinforced with high-density alloys. No one's ever broken out of one." The first guard didn't look convinced. "Still, I don't like it. There's something about him. Like he's studying us." Jinta, the ship's veterinarian, couldn't shake the feeling of unease either. After finishing her duties, she found herself walking toward the observation deck. She didn't know why, but the human's presence had been gnawing at her mind all day. When she arrived, she saw the captain staring at the screen, his expression unreadable. "You're here again," she said quietly. The captain glanced at her, but didn't respond right away. His eyes returned to the screen, where the human now sat perfectly still, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something. "Does he seem odd to you?" the captain finally asked. Jinta hesitated. "I told you before, Captain. He's not like the others. His calmness isn't normal. He's thinking, planning." The captain scoffed, but it was half-hearted. "Planning what? There's nothing he can do from that cell." But even as he said the words, a chill ran down his spine. The human stillness wasn't just calm, it was calculated. Inside the cell, the human finally moved. He stood up, stretching his arms casually before stepping closer to the reinforced door. The guards tensed, their hands hovering over their weapons. "What's he doing?" one of them muttered. The human pressed his hand against the cold metal of the door, his fingers tracing the edges of the reinforced panels. He leaned closer, his head tilting as if he were listening to something within the structure itself. "He's testing the door," the lead guard said sharply, his voice crackling over the comm. "Stay alert." But the human didn't try to force it open. Instead, he stepped back and smiled, a small, unsettling smile that sent shivers down the guards' spines. "What was that?" one of the guards whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," the other replied. "But I don't think I want to find out." Back in the observation room, the captain slammed his fist against the console. "What is he doing?" Jinta watched silently, her fur bristling again. "He's testing you, Captain. He wants you to know he's not afraid. And he wants you to wonder why." The captain glared at her but said nothing. His mind raced with possibilities. He had dealt with dangerous creatures before, but this human was something else entirely. For the first time in years, Captain Antic Ton felt genuinely outmatched, and he hated it. The hum of the ship's engines was constant, a low background noise that usually brought comfort to Captain Antic Ton. But tonight, it seemed louder, almost oppressive. He couldn't shake the image of the human mouthing those words. "I'm ready." Ready for what? In the bowels of the ship, Another creature stirred. The night beast, a terrifying predator from a Class 11 death world, paced in its heavily secured enclosure. Its glowing eyes scanned the dark corners of its cell, its massive body coiled with lethal energy. It was a creature bred for survival, for killing, and for dominance. The captain had always prided himself on capturing such a beast. It was his prized trophy, a symbol of his skill and cunning. But tonight, for the first time, he felt uneasy about its presence. Down in the holding bay, the human sat cross-legged on the floor of his cell, his breathing steady and calm. The guards watched nervously, but the human didn't seem to notice them. His focus was elsewhere, on the vibrations running through the ship, the distant sounds of movement, and the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. He wasn't alone. The guards couldn't hear it, but the human could. A faint growl echoed through the metal walls, so low it was almost a vibration. It came from the farthest cell, where the night beast was kept. The human smiled. "Captain," Chinta's voice crackled over the comms. "You need to see this." The captain hurried to the observation deck where Jinta stood, her fur standing on end. She pointed to the screen showing the night beast's enclosure. The creature was agitated, pacing back and forth, its claws scraping against the floor. It bared its teeth, growling at the shadows as if it sensed something unseen. "It's never acted like this before," Jinta said, her voice trembling. "It's as if it knows something's coming." The captain frowned. "It's just an animal. Maybe the vibrations from the engines are disturbing it." But even as he spoke, he didn't believe his own words. The night beast was a predator, attuned to danger in ways no one else could understand. If it was on edge, there was a reason. In the holding bay, the human stood up. He stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders, his movements slow and deliberate. Then he stepped closer to the door of his cell and spoke for the first time since his capture. "Can you hear it?" The guards exchanged nervous glances. "Hear what?" One of them asked. "The beast," the human replied, his voice calm but laced with something that sent chills down their spines. "It knows what's coming. Do you?" The lead guard tightened his grip on his weapon. "Shut up and step back from the door." The human tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "You've never been to a death world, have you?" he asked, his tone almost pitying. "You wouldn't survive a day." Up in the observation deck, the captain replayed the human's words over and over. His mind raced as he pieced together the strange puzzle. The human was from Earth, a planet classified as a Class 10 death world. Its inhabitants were rare, and those who ventured into space were even rarer. Most species avoided death worlds entirely, their environments too harsh, their predators too deadly. And yet, this human didn't just survive, he thrived. "What if he's like it?" Jinta said softly, breaking the captain's train of thought. "Like what?" He snapped. "Like the night beast," she replied. "A predator. The survivor." The captain's blood ran cold. Back in the holding bay, the human pressed his hand against the reinforced door of his cell. He closed his eyes, as if listening to something only he could hear. The distant growl of the night beast grew louder, echoing through the ship. The guards shifted nervously, their weapons raised. "What's he doing?" One of them whispered. "I don't know," another replied, "but I don't think it's good." The human opened his eyes and smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "You brought a predator onto this ship," he said, his voice steady. "Two, actually, but only one of them is caged." The holding bay was pitch black, save for the faint emergency lights that cast eerie red glows across the walls. The guards were on edge, their weapons clutched tightly. They couldn't see much, but they could hear the low, guttural growl of the night beast reverberating through the ship, accompanied by the steady, measured breathing of the human. "Turn the lights back on." One guard barked into his comm unit, his voice cracking with fear. "We're working on it," came the panicked reply from the control room. In his cell, the human leaned casually against the door, his eyes adjusting to the faint light. To him, the darkness wasn't a hindrance. It was an advantage. He could sense the fear emanating from the guards, hear their frantic breathing and the trembling in their voices. "You're afraid," the human said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not just of the beast, but of me." "Shut up," one guard shouted, aiming his weapon at the door. The human chuckled softly. "It's funny. You think your weapons will protect you, but in the darkness, they're just toys." Up on the observation deck, the captain watched the security feed with growing dread. The cameras were barely functional, their flickering images showing shadows and movement but little else. "Get those lights back on now," the captain ordered, slamming his fist on the console. Jinta stood beside him, her fur bristling. "It's not just the lights," she said, her voice low. "The beast is reacting to him. Look." On the monitor, the night beast was no longer pacing. It stood still, its glowing eyes locked on the direction of the holding bay. It wasn't growling anymore. It was waiting. "For what?" the captain muttered under his breath. The guards in the holding bay were growing increasingly desperate. One of them fumbled with his comm unit, trying to contact the captain. "We need backup," he shouted. "The human, he's doing something." "What are you talking about?" The captain's voice barked back. "He's just standing there," the guard stammered. "But it feels like he's watching us, even in the dark. Like he knows something we don't." The human spoke again, his tone calm but commanding. "You've never met a Deathworlder before, have you?" One guard sneered, trying to mask his fear. "What's so special about you, You're just another prisoner." The human smirked. "You think you've caged me, but you don't understand. On my world, survival isn't just a skill. It's instinct. And in the dark, instincts take over." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence eroding with every word. Meanwhile, in the night beast's enclosure, something shifted. The reinforced door to its cell groaned under immense pressure, as if the creature inside was testing its strength against the metal. "Captain," Jinta said, her voice trembling, "if the beast gets loose." "It won't," the captain interrupted, though his voice lacked conviction. "The security measures are flawless." But as the words left his mouth, a deafening clang echoed through the ship. Jinta's eyes widened. That didn't sound flawless. In the holding bay, the guards froze as the sound reached them. The human straightened, his calm demeanor never faltering. "Do you hear that?" he asked, tilting his head as if listening to a distant melody. "That's the sound of a predator testing its limits. It won't be long now." The lead guard raised his weapon, aiming it directly at the human. "If you're trying to scare us, it's not going to work." The human smiled, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to warn you." The night beast stood in the center of its broken cell, its massive form illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. Its dark fur bristled, and its glowing eyes swept the room with an intelligence that sent a shiver down every guard's spine. The guards in the holding bay backed away instinctively, their weapons shaking in their hands. "Seal the doors," one of them screamed. "It's too late," the human said calmly, still leaning against his cell door. His voice carried an almost amused tone. "You underestimated it, just like you underestimated me." On the observation deck, the captain watched in horror as the security feed showed the beast prowling forward. It moved with the grace of a predator, but with an unnatural stillness, as if every step was calculated. "Shut it down. Contain it," the captain bellowed. "We're trying," a frantic voice from the control room replied. "The systems aren't responding. It's overriding us somehow." Jinta's fur was on end, her eyes glued to the screen. "The beast isn't acting like a typical predator," she said, her voice trembling. "It's listening to him." The captain turned sharply to face her. "Listening to who?" "The human," she whispered. In the holding bay, the beast let out a low growl that reverberated through the walls. The human straightened and took a step closer to the bars of his cell. The guards immediately aimed their weapons at him, but he didn't flinch. "It's responding to me," the human said, almost to himself. "It knows I'm not afraid of it. Predators respect strength." The lead guard snarled, trying to regain control of the situation. "Shut up. Stay back, or I'll—" Before he could finish, the beast's glowing eyes locked onto him. With a single deafening roar, it lunged. Chaos erupted in the holding bay. Guards screamed and fired their weapons, but the beast was too fast. It moved like a shadow, dodging bullets and leaping effortlessly over obstacles. The human watched from his cell, his expression unreadable. He could have stayed silent, but instead, he spoke. "You're wasting your time. It's not just a creature, it's a survivor, like me. And survivors don't go down easily." The lead guard turned to him, desperation in his eyes. "How do we stop it?" The human smirked. "Maybe you don't." The beast's attack was swift and precise. It disarmed one guard with a swipe of its claws, sending his weapon skidding across the floor. Another guard tried to run, but the beast blocked his path with an almost deliberate cruelty. "Fall back," the lead guard shouted. "We can't handle this thing." But there was nowhere to fall back to. The beast had them cornered, its eyes gleaming with predatory delight. On the observation deck, the captain slammed his fist against the console. "We're losing control. Get reinforcements down there now." "Reinforcements won't help," Chinta said quietly, her gaze still on the screen. "The beast isn't fighting for survival. It's fighting for dominance, and the human is the only one it recognizes as an equal." The captain froze, her words sinking in. He looked back at the screen, where the human now stood calmly in his cell, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos around him. "What are you suggesting?" the captain asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chinta hesitated, then said, "If you want to stop the beast, you'll need his help." The human stood face to face with the night beast, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around him. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as the beast snarled, its massive form towering over him. The guards held their breath, weapons raised but unused. No one dared intervene. They knew this moment was beyond their control. The human crouched slightly, his muscles tensing. "You've been underestimated your whole life, haven't you?" he said softly, his voice carrying an air of understanding. The beast growled low, its glowing eyes narrowing. "I get it," the human continued, taking a slow step forward. "You're not just an animal. You're a survivor, like me." On the observation deck, the captain watched in stunned silence. "What is he doing?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. Jinta's fur bristled, her eyes glued to the screen. "He's talking to it, but it's not just words. It's something deeper. He's challenging it without fear. Predators respect strength." The captain shook his head in disbelief. "If he's wrong, it'll tear him apart." The beast roared, its deafening cry shaking the walls. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "You think I'm afraid of you?" he asked, his tone steady. "I've faced worse than you, and I'm still standing." The beast hesitated, its growl faltering. It circled him, testing him, its predatory instincts warring with a newfound curiosity. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. "Should we do something?" one whispered. "No," the lead guard replied, his voice tight. "Look at it. The beast isn't attacking. It's listening." The human stopped moving, standing tall and meeting the beast's gaze head-on. "You're not just a killer," he said. "You're a leader. But even leaders need to know when to trust someone else." The beast tilted its head, its growl fading into silence. For a moment, the tension in the room was so thick that no one dared breathe. And then the beast lowered its massive head, its glowing eyes softening. On the observation deck, Jinta let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He's done it," she whispered. The captain stared at the screen, his mind racing. He's controlling it. How is that possible? It's not control, Chinta said, shaking her head. It's respect. The beast sees him as an equal now, a predator, just like itself. The human reached out slowly, his hand hovering just above the beast's snout. We're not enemies, he said quietly. We're survivors. Together, we're unstoppable. The beast let out a low rumble, almost like a purr, and leaned into his touch. The guard stared in disbelief. The lead guard lowered his weapon, his hands trembling. What did we just witness? The human and the night beast walked side by side through the dimly lit corridors of the ship. The beast's glowing eyes scanned the area, every step of its massive frame shaking the floor. The guards didn't dare move, their weapons hanging uselessly by their sides. The human glanced back at the stunned crew, a smirk playing on his lips. You thought you could cage us. You thought you could control what you don't understand. Big mistake. On the observation deck, the captain slammed a hoof onto the console, his voice a mix of anger and panic. Seal off the lower decks. Don't let them reach the hangar. Chinta's ears flattened as she stared at the screen. You don't get it, do you? She said softly. He's not just escaping. He's proving a point. This isn't a rebellion, it's a warning. The captain turned to her, his eyes wide with disbelief. A warning? Against what? Against underestimating humans, she replied, her tone grave. Alarms blared throughout the ship, but the human moved with confidence, the night beast guarding his every step. A group of armed guards blocked their path, their weapons trained on them. Stop right there, barked the lead guard. The human raised his hand slightly, his expression calm. Do you really think you can stop me? The guards hesitated, their fear palpable. The night beast let out a deep, guttural growl, its sharp teeth glinting under the red emergency lights. You have two choices, the human continued. Step aside, or see what happens when a predator is pushed too far. The lead guard's hands trembled as he signaled his men to lower their weapons. Let them through, he muttered, his voice shaky. The hangar doors loomed ahead, but the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. You'll never get off this ship, he shouted. I'll blow it apart before I let you escape. The human chuckled, his tone mocking. You're welcome to try, Captain. But I think you're forgetting something. He stepped onto the hangar platform, his hand resting on the beast's massive head. This ship doesn't belong to you anymore. The night beast roared, its voice echoing through the ship like a thunderclap. The lights flickered, and the power systems began to fail. The crew screamed as the ship's AI system went haywire. What's happening? The captain demanded, his voice frantic. Chinta stared at the screens, her fur bristling. The beast, it's interfering with the ship's systems. It's more intelligent than we thought. It's taking control. The human climbed into a sleek escape pod, the beast following close behind. As the pod's engines roared to life, the ship's crew could only watch helplessly. On the observation deck, the captain slammed his fists against the console. This isn't over, he roared. I'll hunt you down to the ends of the galaxy. The human's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and taunting. You can try, Captain, but you'll never catch us. You've made a big mistake capturing me. Now you've unleashed something you can't stop. As the escape pod shot into the vastness of space, the human leaned back in his seat, a satisfied grin on his face. The beast curled up beside him, its glowing eyes watching him intently. We're free now, he said quietly, his hand resting on the beast's massive paw. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. The beast let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that almost resembled a laugh. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. Together, they were an unstoppable force, a duo that no one in the galaxy could hope to challenge.